prayers.
Almighty God, who in thy infinite wisdom and providential goodness has appointed the officers of rulers and councils for this welfare of society and the just government of man, we beseech thee to behold with thy abundant favor us, thy servants, whom thou hast been pleased to call to the performance of such important trust in this our island. Let thy blessing descend upon us here in assembly gathered, and grant that we may, as in thy presence, treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberations in so just and faithful a manner as to promote thy honor and glory, and to advance the good of those whose interests thou hast committed to our charge. All which we seek in thy name, and for the sake of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Please be seated. Motion for the approval of the order paper as circulated.
Mr. President, I rise to move a motion for the approval of the order paper as circulated.
Mr. President, I second that motion.
The question is that the approval for the order paper circulated be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Messages from the Deputy Governor General. Announcements by the President.
Good morning all. Let me at this time ask those in the gallery if your phone, cell phone that is not turned off, kindly do so now or put on silent so that we would have little or no interruption during the course of our deliberations here in this house. This morning, I am pleased to have here in the House of Assembly the 4 youth parliamentarians who represented Nevis at the last conference held in Trinidad in July. They are in their school uniform this morning because basically I do not wish to keep them here all day, and so I want to take the opportunity to let them have a 1-minute session in terms of expressing their experience at the Youth Parliament in Trinidad. I must say that they did exceedingly well for first comers. And it was my intention to have done it earlier, but due to the fact that we did not have a House of Assembly until now, I take the opportunity to do it now. So, the 4 persons would come and speak for a minute, expressing and to say thank you to the persons who assisted in ensuring that they attended the conference. The leader of that group was none other than Mr. Patrice Nisbet Jr. So, Mr. Nisbet, could you kindly come and speak, please? You're going to use the mic on this side.
Good morning. I would just like to say that going to Trinidad was a great experience as we got to network with other youth parliamentarians. It helped with our oratory skills, And I would just like to express my deepest gratitude to the organizers and for everyone who made this trip possible for the young parliamentarians and myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Morton.
Good morning. It is an honor to be in your presence today. I would just like to thank the NIA, Mr. Farrell Smithern, and Miss Myra Williams, and just want to say thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Ms. Lowe.
Good morning, everyone. I would just like to express my gratitude to the organizers, to Mr. Farrell, Miss Williams, and our chaperone, Miss Morton, for giving us the opportunity to go into Trinidad for the 15th Regional Youth Parliamentary Debate to strengthen our skills in oratory and basically opening our eyes to how stuff are done in the region. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Dorr.
Morning, everyone. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude and how much I truly appreciate this opportunity. It was a learning experience, a social experience, just a good experience all around, and I really thank all the officials that put it together for the chance to experience this for myself. Thank you.
And I would have to indicate to all and sundry the institutions and corporate citizens who helped in defraying the costs for these 4 students to have gone on to Trinidad. Our platinum sponsor was the Nevis Island Administration. Then we had the Nevis Land and Housing Land Development Corporation. For the first time, we were able to tap some resources from across the waters. There's a company by the name of Kajaro Kistada Limited in St. Kitts. They assisted. And we had Mr. Orwell Martin of Kawaj and Associates. We had Carl Claxton of Reliable Motors. We had the Bank of Nevis Limited. We had the St. Kitts and Nevis Social Security Board. We had S.L. Hosford's Nevis Limited. We had Nevis Cooperative Credit Union. We had Mr. Elvis Starr Maynard of Stellar Engineering. And last, by no means least, we had LEFCO. They were the ones who assisted in us, and I say us because I am part of the Youth Parliament, and I am pleased that this time around we were able to perform in a manner that was accepted by all the other jurisdictions. And so I wish to thank those persons who assisted and wish them all the best, and hopefully next year when we come again to move on to the next meeting, we will get the assistance and from others also. Now, this morning, the students would have to go back to school because it is not my intention to keep them away. So, if you are ready now, you can leave. Your transport is outside waiting for you. And so, could you kindly leave in an orderly manner as if you are in your parliament? May it please you.
Mr. President, you would recall that the bill, Nevis Investment Promotion Agency, Amendment Bill 2018, was brought to this Honorable House on the 15th day of November 2018 for its second and third readings before it was subsequently passed into law. However, the amendment that was made to Section 6 during committee stage of that said bill was not included in the final version of the ordinance that was submitted and published in the Extraordinary Gazette number 65 of 2018 and dated Friday the 21st day of December 2018. The correct version of that amendment, or amended section, Section 6 that is of the above mentioned bill, is now laid before this Honorable House to correct this error and for subsequent publication in the Gazette.
Mr. President, I rise and seek leave to have laid in this Honorable House the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Regulations 2019 and the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Advertisement Control Regulations 2019. Mr. President, the last time we were here in this Honorable House, we saw a number of amendments to the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance. And Mr. President, we saw that it was necessary and important to bring to this House the necessary regulations to those amendments and to that particular ordinance. I want to, from the outset, Mr. President, thank the hard-working staff at the legal department. I believe, Mr. President, that they continue to go above and beyond the call of duty as it regards to trying to upgrade and amend the necessary legislations and ordinance here on the island of Nevis. So I want to thank them for their hard work. I also, Mr. President, want to thank the good Department of Physical Planning. They continue to be under a lot of pressure, Mr. President, but I continue to say to them that once they follow the necessary legislations, that they can rest assured that they have a friend in this government. I want to thank also, Mr. President, my PS and the assistant PS for their continued good cooperation.
Demonstrated to our workers that we care and that we put them in the best possible position that we could, given the constraints that we had. And I'm delighted today to report that the hotel is now reopened. They are receiving guests. Indeed, I was on hand to receive and welcome their first guests, a couple from Memphis, Tennessee, who were their first guests after this long period of difficulty when the resort was closed. We wish them Godspeed, that the balance of the construction is completed on schedule as they have intended, and we look forward certainly to the Four Seasons continuing to play its role. But it was important that I rise to thank them for honoring their commitment and to say to them and to the workers and to the people of Nevis that we as a government will continue to work hard to ensure that these organizations continue to contribute to the economy of the island of Nevis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Personal explanations. Introduction of bills and first readings.
Mr. President, I rise to seek to introduce and have read a first time in this Honorable House the Integrity in Public Life Amendment Bill 2019.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled the Integrity in Public Life Amendment 2019 be read a first time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Integrity in Public Life Ordinance Number 2 of 2013 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a first time.
Mr. President, I rise again to move that the bill shortly entitled Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Amendment Bill 2019 be read a first time.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Operators Amendment 2019 be read a first time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Ordinance Number 1 of 2012 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a first time.
Mr. President, I rise and seek your leave to introduce and have read a first time the Nevis Animals Trespass and Pound Amendment Bill 2019.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Animal Trespass and Pounds Amendment 2019 be read the first time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Trespass and Pound Ordinance, Chapter 3.02, and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
Bill has been read first time.
Mr. President, I rise to and seek leave to introduce and have read a first time the bill shortly entitled Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Amendment Number 2, Bill 2019.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Amendment Number 2 of Bill of 2019 be read the first time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance, Chapter 6.09, and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
Bill has been read the first time.
Public business, bill second and third readings.
Mr. President, I rise to commence the debate and discussion on the Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Amendment Bill 2019 that ordinarily comes on the second reading. The Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Operators Ordinance 2012 was originally drafted in 2010 but in fact was not made into law and gazetted until May of 2012. This ordinance was accompanied by the minimum standards regulations for taxi operators on the island of Nevis. The continued aim of the legislation is to improve the standards and expectations of taxi operators within the tourism industry. The legislation and regulations use measures that are standard operating procedures in the Ministry of Tourism for many years. We have come at this time, Mr. President, because we are on the cusp of the start of what we traditionally refer to as the high season for tourism. Indeed, preliminary reports that we have received from the Nevis Tourism Authority tell us that this year we will have a higher than usual level of activity. You would have heard in my statement on the statements by ministers as I spoke to the reopening of the Four Seasons Resort and their expectation, Mr. President, that they will have the best bookings that they have had in the last 15 years. In addition, the information from the Nevis Tourism Authority is that this year we will have an unusually high number of guests coming to our island via the cruise ships. We are all aware that Nevis is not a major cruise destination. We are all aware that we have used cruise as an entry point, an introduction, a portal to the island of Nevis in the hope that those who come on ships may fall in love and decide to come back and stay at one of our hotels. Indeed, I believe the data, the empirical data, supports the view that we make most money from this industry when we have heads in beds, when people stay at our hotels and at our guest houses and at our villas. And so we use cruise in that way. But when our visitors come to our shores, whether they stay at the hotels or they come via the cruise ships, they depend on our taxi operators. Our taxi operators, our tour bus operators, they are in every sense on the front line, Mr. President, of our tourism industry. They can make or break the industry. If they have a good rapport and a good time with those who they ferry around the island, it can make the world of difference in terms of those people's views of Nevis and whether or not they are minded to come back and to visit us again. Some taxi drivers are so excellent at what they do that repeat visitors use only those taxis over and over. Many, as we know, have long-standing contractual arrangements with the various hotels, restaurants, and the like. If the numbers from the NTA bear fruit, we should have some 64 calls at our port this year in Nevis. Last year we had only 62. This year we have 64. Just 2 calls in terms of the difference. But what the NTA is saying to us is that those 62 calls that we had last year were largely smaller ships. Some of them maybe 20, 40 passengers. The 64 calls we have this year, we will have calls from some ships that carry as many as 1,200 passengers. And so we anticipate that last year we had only a capacity of 6,275 passengers. This year, that has jumped to 14,750 passengers. I say that because the taxi drivers who are on the front line have to prepare themselves. And that is why we're here today, to let them know that we continue to insist on the best possible standards, Mr. President. We continue to work very closely through the Ministry of Tourism on training, on equipping the taxi drivers with the necessary skill set. And we must ensure that we have the legislative framework in place to allow us to have the best possible partnership with our taxi and tour bus operators. The aims of the legislation since 2012 were to address the industry concerns specific to the taxi subsector, to encourage taxi operators to work together and to cooperate with other tourism industry stakeholders, to define and enforce a code of ethics to regulate the behavior of taxi operators. And everybody who knows me knows that I'm a plain speaker. And so, Mr. President, I want to use this rostrum to appeal to our taxi operators. You hear what I said? They are on the front line. And I have seen taxi operators with what, when I was a boy, they used to call slappers or slippers on their feet, going to work. That can't be right. We are holding them to a high standard because they are the ambassadors for the island. And if the government is going to invest in them through duty-free and through training and through all of these, then we are asking them respectfully to be responsible and to conduct themselves in a responsible way in terms of their interaction with guests. We have had complaints that some who choose to be unscrupulous overcharge guests. And the guests know that it should be $20 and they try to charge them $40 or $50 for the service. It leaves a bad taste in the guest's mouth. They go back on board, they send back messages, the hotel send messages to say that their guests were overcharged. We have had reports of a taxi driver, and this may sound a little comical, but it's true, that he picked up some people from a hotel to take them to a particular place. And on his way, said he had to pick up his girlfriend to take her to the supermarket. And the people complained. They said, we are paying for a taxi to take us. How you dare detour to take your girlfriend to a supermarket? We have among us a number of people who say that they're taxi drivers but only do so on a part-time basis. And so as a result of that, perhaps do not treat it with the seriousness that it deserves. And so the code of ethics is important, Mr. President. The levels of discipline and professionalism among taxi operators in Nevis is critical. And we have absolutely to ensure that we continue in that vein, that we have, Mr. President, the best possible representation. Having said what I have said earlier, lest the public feel that I'm being overly critical, let me point out that we have an excellent cohort of taxi operators on the island. That the vast majority are professional and that they conduct themselves in a particular way and in an appropriate way. And so, Mr. President, I want to celebrate them as well. I want to say to them that the taxi operators are doing an excellent job and that we continue to depend on them to be our ambassadors and to be our first point of contact with those who come and visit. If they do their job well, then the island benefits. All of us benefit. And so we continue to work with them very closely. One of the ways we're seeking to work with them, and one of the aims of the legislation, is to ensure that we have the minimum standards for our vehicles. Minimum standards for our vehicles. If the vehicle is not up to standard, it creates a problem. If the vehicle windows can't roll up and rain comes, what you going to do? If the vehicle has no air conditioning and the sun is hot, what you going to do? So we at the ministry and the government continue to work with the taxi operators and the tour bus operators to get the best possible standard of vehicles. And I believe most have responded positively because we look at the standard of vehicles that the taxi drivers are driving. We look at the fact that they change them at regular intervals, and at every step of the way, the government has partnered with them in terms of duty-free, in terms of allowing them access at the least possible cost to them getting their vehicles in order. Indeed, it would be remiss of me if I did not point out that the taxi operators are perhaps one of the most privileged subsectors that we have operating in Nevis. You know why? Because every number of years, I think it's 5 years, or is it 7? 5 years. Every 5 years, they're entitled to a new vehicle duty-free. Every 5 years. It is the only industry that I'm aware of that the people of Nevis, the government of Nevis, invest in continuously. And some have used that to expand their fleets. Some who had 1 now have 2 and 3 and 4. But we have worked with them. And I want them to understand that this is a partnership, and in a partnership, to whom much is given, much is expected. And we require them to operate with the necessary professionalism. We want to improve the image of the taxi subsector, enhance customer satisfaction, and at the same time provide an avenue through which issues and complaints could be effectively and quickly addressed. We want to empower the taxi associations. The legislation was designed to do that. And why are the taxi associations important, Mr. President? Because they are the voice. I can't, as the Premier of Nevis or as the Minister of Tourism, speak for the taxi operators. They best know their needs, their concerns, their challenges. But too often we hear that they don't want to join the associations. They're not prepared to participate in the very organizations that will represent them and that will come to the government and indicate to the government where there are difficulties and how we can do better. So again, I use this rostrum to appeal to our taxi operators, please, to get involved with the associations, so that when the government speaks to the associations, we know that we are speaking to the taxi operators. That is critical. The legislation, however, going back to 2012, had certain difficulties, inaccuracies, loopholes. And so, over the past 2 years, we have had certain specific and recurrent issues relating to the ordinance and its functionality. It is an important statistic that the Nevis Taxi Registry currently reflects 200 persons certified as taxi operators. That's an important statistic. 200 people have been certified. But this is an equally interesting statistic, Mr. President. Only 90 of those 200 are actively working in the industry right now in either full-time or part-time capacity. This shows that there is a potential for another 100 or so new industry entrants, all who would have sat a ministry course in the last 3 to 4 years and who must now fulfill other requirements. So we have certified about 200 taxi operators, but only 90 are functioning. And remember, as I said, that many of those do it part-time. They have a regular job in government or someplace else, and when that regular job is over during the day, they do a little taxiing. But the numbers suggest, and you know, I am going to wait to see how it works out, because we have a ship that is paying an inaugural call. Can't remember the name offhand now, but it's doing an inaugural call, and I'm told it's over 1,200 passengers are going to be on that ship. In the past, the largest ship we've had is a ship called Azamara. And Azamara would bring, let's say, about 700 passengers. And when Azamara came in the past, we had to press all the the buses that run the usual routes. We had to bring them and ask the bus operators to ignore their usual routes to assist with the crush of people that were coming off the cruise ship. So I am anxiously awaiting when the 1,200 arrive to see how we're going to do that, because perhaps agriculture and public works and everybody might have to bring their vehicles to bear as well. I say that to say that while we at the ministry, at the Nevis Tourism Authority, continue to make best effort, continue to promote the island, continue to encourage people to come to the island, the stakeholders, the taxi drivers amongst them, must prepare themselves. And if 200 people have taken the course and been certified, it says something that only 90 are active. And among those 90, some of those are only part-time. We also look, and I mean no discourtesy when I say this, but we see a lot of our taxi drivers are getting on in age. Some of the more seasoned, the ones who have been doing it for a long time, we can see that they're getting on in age. The older we all get, the less agile, the less alert we become. And so, as a result, we recognize that there's a need for new entrants, younger people coming in, to ensure that we have a vibrant taxi and bus and tour operator sector. And so I make that clarion call that the professionals and my technocrats are telling me that we can now accommodate at least 100 new people into the taxi operating business. And as I said, it is one of the best businesses to be in, because it's the only business that gets constant support from the government through duty-free and other concessions. In fact, if I recall, it's not only duty-free on a vehicle, they get duty-free on tires as well. And parts. You hear that, Mr. President? Taxi operators get duty-free vehicle, duty-free tires, duty-free parts. Now, Lord, what more could any government do? What more? So we're encouraging them and those out there who listen, because a lot of people, you know, constantly call me up. They call up the other ministers and members of cabinet, say, I'm looking a job. What government have? And sometimes the truth is that government doesn't have anything, because government simply cannot hire everybody. And so when the opportunity arises, Mr. President, where we're seeing a need, we're urging our people to step up to the plate and satisfy that need. Duty-free vehicle, duty-free tires, duty-free parts. I hope they don't come and say they want free gas as well. But the contribution is significant, and the partnership is significant, and we have room in the taxi business for new operators to come in. Moving specifically to the amendments, we have proposed an amendment to Section 2 of the ordinance by repealing the definition of association and substituting the following definition. Association means anybody authorized by the Ministry of Tourism and established under Section 17 of the ordinance to act as a taxi association. The Ministry of Tourism does not recommend that all taxi operators be forced to form one association. In fact, we'll be happy to see even more associations as the industry grows. But we want to urge taxi operators to join an association, because it makes it easier for us to talk to them and for them to talk to us. Amendment to Section 4. Section 4 of the ordinance is amended by repealing Section 4 and substituting the following. The new Section 4, prescribed areas. The areas prescribed for the operation of taxis and tour buses are set out in Schedule 1 of the ordinance. Any operator operating in the prescribed areas as set out in Schedule 1 must hold a valid taxi ID permit issued by the Ministry of Tourism. Operators licensed and are trained by the Ministry of Tourism and the federal government or the St. Kitts Tourism Authority that seek to operate in the prescribed areas, that is in Nevis, they must produce a valid taxi permit ID and must be granted a temporary pass from the Ministry of Tourism in Nevis. That's important, because more and more we see now with the Sea Bridge. Taxi operators, tour bus operators in St. Kitts, they want to drive onto the Sea Bridge with a bus full of tourists, and they bring them over. Or they may well wish, because they see over here that we don't have enough taxis, to come over and operate for the day. We are saying that if that happens, then they must produce a valid taxi permit from St. Kitts, and they must also get a temporary pass from the Ministry of Tourism in Nevis. And we don't want any difficulties. We want people to understand the rules. The Section 4, underscores the permitted areas for all taxi and tour buses. Many operators behave in one manner, at the seaport and airport, but at hotels and other sites behave and even dress differently. That's important, because some of them know they can't go 4 seasons and wear no flip-flops. They can't go 4 seasons and wear no cut-off short pants. And so they operate in 4 seasons in a particular way. But then when they go to the designated areas here, at the port, at the airport, they feel that they don't need to present themselves in the same manner. And so this is important, and an important point to note. We place great value at the Ministry of Tourism on training and the exemplary services expected of our operators. It is therefore expected that operators coming from our sister island in St. Kitts will have to follow the same requirements and require a temporary pass for operations within the prescribed areas in Nevis. I don't think anybody should fault that. It is not our aim, of course, to hinder or limit the expansion of operators coming from St. Kitts, but we add this to ensure uniformity in the sector by all operators. Put differently, wherever you come from, you must adhere to the same high standards that we are setting for Nevis. We have inserted a new subsection 6.3. Following subsection 6.2, Mr. President, a new subsection 6.3 is inserted, and it reads, any body corporate wishing to operate a taxi and tour bus business must seek written approval from the Ministry of Tourism. The applicant or manager of the company must be a certified taxi operator with a minimum of 5 years of experience and be a member of the taxi association established under this ordinance. This new insertion speaks to the potential for expansion of the sector. We are encouraged by the number of operators wishing to expand their range of services. Where a driver wishes, he can now form a taxi and tour bus company. After a few years in the industry, an individual could decide to invest in 2 or 3 vehicles and hire drivers. This speaks well for the volume and entrepreneurial spirit of many of our operators. And at this point, let me single out young Randy Jeffers on the beach, because he's one of those entrepreneurs who has gone full tilt into the tour operator business and is generating value not only for his business, but also generating employment as well. We want to see more of that happening in the island of Nevis, particularly for this season, as we look forward to a robust season. Amendment to Section 7. Section 7.3 of the ordinance is amended by repealing the words, and I quote, subject to certain terms and conditions as the minister thinks fit, and substituting for those words, the words subject to the terms and conditions as prescribed by the regulations. So it's no longer as the minister sees fit. It is now as the regulations prescribe. This change ensures that the terms of the regulations are adhered to and always followed. We're bringing greater certainty, Mr. President, to the sector. The regulations are there. Everybody can read them. Everybody knows what the regulations provide. Amendment to Section 13.3. We are repealing the words complies or. This is to make the meaning of the sentence clearer. So that is just clearing up a scrivener's, not error, but some uncertainty created by how it was expressed. Amendment to Section 14. Section 14.1 of the ordinance is amended by inserting immediately after subsection E the following new subsection. F. Fails to return a taxi permit to the ministry within 3 days of the permit being suspended. This additional condition ensures that when suspended, an operator returns a taxi permit or will be in violation. We have amended Section 17, Mr. President. Section 17.1 of the ordinance is amended by repealing subsection 1 and substituting the following subsection, and I quote, any association comprising of not less than 15 operators may be authorized by the Ministry of Tourism to function as a recognized association under this ordinance. We have amended subsection 19 by repealing the word exceed in subsection 2 and substituting it with the word exceeds, correcting a scrivener's error. We are inserting immediately after subsection 4 the following new subsection, subsection 5. An operator shall not be allowed to use a vehicle which has an R or P plate. An H plate shall not be allowed where the operator is in possession of a valid temporary taxi permit. That also is important. We have heard all kinds of stories coming from some taxi operators in the past. Oh, the vehicle broke down this morning, so they rent a vehicle to run taxi for the day. Oh, this, oh, that, oh, the other. We are trying to make it clear as a matter of law that you cannot operate a taxi with an R plate, rental, or a P plate, meaning a private vehicle. And that if you have an H plate, you will only be allowed to operate when you are in possession of a valid temporary taxi permit. And we want to make that pellucid. We have seen a resurgence in operators attempting to use R or P plates when their usual taxi is down. Operators must understand that this is illegal. The safe transport of all visitors to our destination is of paramount importance, and as such, we are ensuring it is captured in the amendments. We continue to encourage stronger partnership and alliances within the taxi associations. Therefore, when a driver's vehicle is unfortunately out of commission, they should have the added assurance that their brothers and sisters within the association will assist in the interim. You heard me say earlier that some people are part-time taxi operators. So sometimes your bus may be parked up because you're at some other job. And therefore you should be having the kind of relationship through the association that your taxi may well be pressed into service by someone else, not a taxi operator, whose taxi may be out. But I want to be clear that we will not allow people to operate using R plates or P plates, because taxis that have the required T plates have been inspected, they have been certified, we know that they're safe, and we cannot take the chance that somebody gets an old rental or something, and then we have a problem where people are working with them, not against them. We are seeking to work with them. Section 21 is also being amended. Inserting immediately after subsection 2 the following new subsection: a T plate assigned to a vehicle shall not be transferable to another. A T plate assigned to a vehicle shall not be transferable to another vehicle. During the stage when we get to committee, I will suggest that perhaps we ought to amend that to say, without the permission of the Ministry of Tourism. The reason I say that is because if someone were to purchase a new vehicle, they would want, of course, to have the T plate transferred from the old vehicle to that new vehicle. And so we may want to look at that. I will consult, Mr. President, with the technocrats, but just to ensure that we don't create undue hardship. But I think the mischief that this is designed to achieve is that people cannot just take off the plate from one vehicle and put it on another without there being some interaction with those who regulate the industry. The Ministry of Finance issues taxi plates at the request of the Ministry of Tourism, just so the public knows how it works, in direct liaison with the Nevis Traffic Department of the Royal St. Christopher Nevis Police Force. We have seen instances where the owner of a taxi plate, for example, is deceased, and family members continue to renew the plate and even place it on a separate vehicle. Some vehicles have been sold, and the buyer is not aware that the T plate is not transferable, and such cannot be used for taxi operations. So we're trying to tighten up, but at the same time we want to make sure that we don't tighten too tight, that we allow some flexibility and that people can come. So, for example, if the taxi operator who had the T plate is deceased, but their son or daughter has gone through the training and want to continue, then that should be a matter that the Ministry of Tourism should be willing to look at. And so, as I said, we'll have a look at that when we get to that stage. Amendment to Section 22. Section 22 of the Principal Ordinance is repealed and substituted as follows. And this is an important section. The Nevis Taxi Regulatory Committee. There is hereby established a committee to be known as the Nevis Taxi Regulatory Committee, which shall comprise 5 members appointed by the minister as prescribed by the regulations, one of whom shall be appointed as chairman. Any 3 members of the committee, including the chairman appointed under subsection 1, shall constitute a quorum for the meetings of the committee. The committee shall hear and determine disputes between an operator and the minister. An operator who is aggrieved by a decision of the minister has a right to appeal to the committee in writing within 15 days of the date of service of the notice of the decision on him. A person who is dissatisfied with the ruling of the committee under this section may appeal to a judge of the High Court, and the judge may make such order as he or she thinks fit. This change ensures that the name of the appeal committee clearly matches the name outlined in the regulations, and it shows how it is to be constituted. It also ensures that there may be some work for our lawyers, because we understand that we have more lawyers than people in Nevis now, Mr. President. So the lawyers now may have some work, and we're setting out a mechanism, a framework, where people who are aggrieved can challenge. So it's no longer where somebody comes and they're told by the Ministry of Tourism that they cannot do this or permission for that is withheld, and they have no recourse. They will now have recourse to the Taxi Regulatory Committee, and if they're satisfied with that, they clearly have recourse to the court. We'll amend Section 23. Section 23(1) of the Principal Ordinance is amended by inserting immediately after paragraph B the following new paragraph C, and I quote, to make amendments to this ordinance and to the regulations. Section 25, Mr. President, also is being amended by inserting immediately after the word operators the words, and I quote, that are in operation for a minimum of 3 years. This measure has been in place for several years as standard policy, but we are now seeking to make it law. The measure simply asks bona fide drivers or new entrants into the industry to bear some of the costs for operations. We have seen time and time again persons sit our taxi course, then bring in a vehicle, they say for taxi operations, but the vehicle never sees a tourist. And all of us, we live in Nevis, we know it happens. You see people have their personal vehicle, driving it up and down with a big T plate on it, never sees a tourist. So we are trying to tighten up so that people do not feel that by simply doing a taxi course, they get a duty-free. That is the intention behind this particular provision. We feel it is an unfair practice and an abuse of the system. So this measure was instituted over 6 years ago, and it has been highlighted in every taxi course. So it has been our policy, but we are now seeking to insert it into the law, Mr. President. It is by no means, let me emphasize, intended to limit or hinder new operators, only those wishing for duty-free concession on a vehicle to start business. Section 30 of the ordinance is repealed. There is no need for a transition clause. All taxi operators are required to obtain a taxi ID and permit to fulfill the requirements outlined in the legislation. Amendments to Section 31, Section 31(5) of the ordinance is amended by inserting in Section 31(5) immediately after the words of police officer, dispatcher, inspector, the words or a Ministry of Tourism official. Inserting in Section 31(6) immediately before the words a Nevis Air and Seaport Authority, the words a Ministry of Tourism official. Originally, this was omitted from the list, and this adjustment ensures that Ministry of Tourism officials are safeguarded from persons and operators looking to obstruct, hinder, or harass them as they execute their duties in any prescribed area. It also protects the Ministry of Tourism officials from persons using insulting and offensive language. Sadly, our staff, Mr. President, have been faced with various situations. And while we can always involve law enforcement, this additional measure and protection of this amendment is to afford our staff greater protection. We think it will go a long way. Taxi operators, tour bus operators must understand that they must respect the Ministry of Tourism officials and our partners. The rules of the prescribed areas are there to ensure proper governance by everyone. A few bad seeds continue to feel that they are untouchable, and we encourage them to become familiar with the legislation and its regulation to ensure that they do not run afoul of the law. It cannot and it will not be business as usual, where we have drivers overcharging, wearing what they want, abusing dispatchers, NASPA, and other officials. I am here today, Mr. President, to say that we are serious about the standards we expect from our operators, and we hope everyone understands and complies. I end not on that note, but on this note to say that the vast majority of our taxi operators are compliant, and they continue to work closely with us and to cooperate with us. We see this legislation and the amendments as critical to creating the necessary ecosystem to ensure that we continue in this vein of cooperation and we continue to deliver a first-class service in a first-class jurisdiction that is the island of Nevis. May it please you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I rise to lend my support to the mover of the bill that is before this Honorable House, and that is a bill to amend the Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Ordinance number 1 of 2012. I am moved to come and lend my support, Mr. President, because, well, of course, we always look at bills and look at them in depth to see whether they're controversial in any way, or they make sense, or they're hitting the necessary points that they should hit. I believe these are some simple amendments that are being made, and nothing meant to create any controversy or any difficulty for taxi operators and tour operators here on the island of Nevis. I will say to you, Mr. President, that taxi and tour operators to the island of Nevis and the industry in which they serve is very important and very critical. And from our standpoint as an administration, I do believe that whatever efforts are being made by the Ministry of Tourism and all of the stakeholders involved is to ensure that we are bringing a certain standard and a level of quality of service to that industry and the people that they serve. I will say to you, Mr. President, that the safety and security of our guests or visitors to the island is of paramount importance to the survival of the tourism sector and tourism industry here on the island of Nevis. So if these amendments are being made to ensure that we shore up or we bring some more, not necessarily teeth, but bring some more standards to the industry, or improve standards, then of course we are on the right track in doing so. Mr. President, when I look at that, the taxi and tour operation business here on the island, we cannot run away from the fact that these individuals who work in this industry are service providers in a service-oriented business. So service, and you hear many times I'm using the word service. Service is of utmost importance to this industry. So if it is that we are bringing these amendments to improve the service and to make sure there is full compliance, then I believe that we must be commended. But not only be commended, the operators themselves should not see this in a bad light in any way. Because I'm sure some persons might be out there saying, oh, they're coming after the taxi operators and tour operators. And I want to say it's nothing like that. Because many of us who sit on this side and those in the gallery must have had exposure to various taxi operators throughout the world. And every time we travel, I am certain that we all make comparisons to see what we are offering as against what we are receiving elsewhere. I do that, and I'm sure the mover of the bill would do that, and those on the those who are here on this side of the aisle. Because we do that because this island, the island of Nevis, is important to all of us. We love this island, and we love what happens here on the island of Nevis, and that is why, in a wholesome way, we want everything that happens here on the island of Nevis to be consistent with what we are trying to accomplish, and that is to ensure we're offering the utmost best service. I am certain that most of the operators, if not all, understand that they are selling the island of Nevis. And when I say selling the island of Nevis, we have more than enough places here on the island of Nevis of interest. Historical sites, places of business, places of interest here on the island of Nevis. So when you pick up a guest, whether at the Charleston port, whether at the airport, the new water taxi facility, at a hotel, at a restaurant, or wherever, you're interacting with someone who is intrigued. I want to know more about Nevis, and that is why injecting anything negative to our guests. Remember I said before, you're selling the island. And in selling the island, there are many positive attributes about the island of Nevis. And you should not be engaging in conversations that would make Nevis look or bring Nevis into a bad light in any way. And that is the point I'm trying to make regarding this particular section. Even though it is there, I am hoping that our good taxi operators and tour operators will not be in contravention of this particular section of the bill. But if you are asked to bring in your permit because it has been revoked for some reason, You're asked to bring it in, yes, within 3 days. Mr. President, I do not think this particular section should be misconstrued in any way. Let me give you an example. If you're employed by TDC or Hosford or any of those major companies, the uniform you wear belongs to them, you know. So if you're terminated for some reason and they tell you bring back the uniform, by all rights you have to bring it back because it was their expense that went into the making of that uniform. And the idea and everything, there was an expense in that. It is their property. So if you're told to bring in an ID or a permit that you would have been given or issued to you, I must say, then you must return it within 3 days. Do not find yourself in contravention of this particular section. But as I said before as well, there shouldn't be any need for that. If you're conducting your business and you're offering this service and you're in compliance with the ordinance, then there is no need for you to be asked to bring in these particular permits for some reasons. Now, Mr. President, I want to say to our taxi operators that this particular industry, there are lots of money to be made, you know. Lots of money to be made. Let me give you at least one example. We just constructed this water taxi facility over there at Uwali Beach. And when some operators sit there and look across the waters, they see Park Hyatt. Now, most times they would sit and wait for persons to disembark, and then they ask them, where are you going to? But I'll also say that most times, if not all of the time, those guests already made arrangement prior to coming, you know. The point I'm trying to make, this is an opportunity for our taxi operators to start marketing themselves. Get their names out there. Jump on a boat, a water taxi, go across the Park Hyatt, find some way of getting a name over there, and offer some day trips to Nevis, coordinate with it, the water taxi operator. I'm just giving some ideas, you know, maybe it sounds far-fetched, but it makes sense to me that our taxi operators can do even better than they're doing by engaging in marketing themselves to the Marriott, Park Hyatt, Kittishon Hill, wherever over there on the other side. Because we have always heard about 2 islands, 1 paradise. That is what it's all about. Take advantage of the infrastructure that this administration is offering to you or providing for you. Go over to St. Kitts or wherever, get your name even in magazines in England. Work out the price. Ask for the right deals that are out there. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full page, half page, quarter page, something. Find some way of getting your name out there. But I will also say, in relation to that, Mr. President, some have been doing an excellent job. Because for 14, 15 years, they have the same clients who keep coming back. And you know why that happens? It's because they have been offering impeccable service over those 14, 15 years. And when they come and they ask for taxi operator Tom, just to give you a name, it means that Tom has done an excellent job to sell himself over the years, and persons keep coming back over and over again to utilize the service of Tom. I also want to say, Mr. President, that this bill in and of itself is one that is necessary and needed. I wrote down a bit of statistic that the mover of the bill would have mentioned during his presentation. He said there are 200 persons registered as taxi operators, and only 90 are active. Whether it is that persons are doing so just to get a vehicle duty-free or what, or there's just not enough business, which is unlikely because we know what has happened here on the island of Nevis. I want to say that even teachers out there can get involved in this particular area. Why I bring that up? Belize, for example. On a day when you have multiple boats down in Belize, even doctors, lawyers, all of those affluent persons, they abandon their office, you know, Mr. President, and gone to operate to make extra money. This is quick cash, you know, quick cash, cash on delivery of service. So that can be an encouragement for persons here in Nevis who believe because they have a certain profession, they're not going to get into the taxi operation business. It is there for everyone. And when they decide to get into it, you understand the economic spin-off of that. You buy a vehicle, it has to be licensed, you have the necessary servicing that has to be done, tires to be bought, and of course the ultimate thing is that you are receiving payment for your service so that you can feed your family, send your children to school, do all of the necessary things that those extra finances can do for you. So it is an area that I would encourage anybody to get into. As I said before, when the move of the bill was here, listen, if there are more than enough guests who comes off of this large ship when it comes, and I'm around town, I'm going to find somewhere to jump in. That might sound not consistent with me as a minister of government, but well, I'll get one before the time comes. I'll try and get myself in compliance because I don't want to break the law. I don't want to be in contravention in any way. But the point I'm trying to make, Mr. President, no matter what your profession is out there, the taxi business is not just for a certain type of person. It's for everybody. I just alluded to what's going on in Belize. All of these folks get involved, even if it's for a day. Even if for a couple of days, they get involved and make some quick money. The more the merrier, the more money circulated, the better it is for the island of Nevis. So I want persons to take advantage. But Mr. President, I just highlighted one section of the bill. At least I spoke to one section. I wouldn't go back through all of the necessary things that are there because the mover would have done a good job in covering the entire bill. But my support for what is being presented here today is certainly to be documented. I am in full support of the amendments to this bill, and I am lending my support in closing to the move of the bill and wish this bill and all of the changes and amendments safe passage, Mr. President. May it please you.
Mr. President, I rise to lend my voice and support to the bill that is before this Honorable House at this time, the Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Amendment Bill 2019. But Mr. President, I just want to very briefly highlight two sections of this particular bill. Section 22, Mr. President, of the proposed changes, and item 4. An operator who is aggrieved by a decision of the ministry has a right to appeal to the committee in writing within 15 days of the date of service of the date of the decision on him. And Mr. President, I want to highlight this particular section because there are times when persons are facing difficulties and challenges with various ministries, and they don't necessarily address the issue to the right authority or at the right place. We find, Mr. President, that these grievances are addressed at different forums, and the necessary redress, Mr. President, are not necessarily garnered because the issue that the persons are facing are not properly addressed. So I just want to encourage our people, Mr. President, and especially our taxi operators, that here is a classic example where you have a particular course where you can achieve the necessary result that you are seeking. You can write to the committee, Mr. President, within 15 days and have your issue heard and have it resolved. Item 5, Mr. President, they can even take it further. They can go to the courts. And I believe, Mr. President, we have a judicial system that is fair, unjust. We don't necessarily, at times, agree with the outcome of some of the decisions. But I want to say to our taxi operators that they also have that course, Mr. President, where they can have their concern heard also in the court. Mr. President, I just wanted to highlight those two areas and to say to our taxi operators, it doesn't matter what the difficulties are that they are facing, they have the necessary avenue to have those concerns addressed. Thank you, Mr. President, and I wish this bill safe passage.
Mr. President, there appears to be unanimous support for the bill from the government and from the opposition benches. So I would ask that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Amendment Bill 2019 be read a second time.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Taxi and Tour Operation Amendment 2019 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Ordinance Number 1 of 2012 and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
Bill has been read a second time. House in committee stage.
Clause 17.
The question is that clause 17 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 16.
The question is that clause 16 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 15.
The question is that clause 15 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 14.
Question is that clause 14 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 13.
Excuse me. Okay, I'm sorry. Clause 13.
Yes. Is it 13 or 12 you're looking at?
No, we're talking about section 22. Forgive me. That was what? Clause 13? I thought that's where we're going now. Yeah. We dealt with clause 13 already?
No.
Okay.
No.
Right.
No.
So clause 13 deals with Nevis Taxi Regulatory Committee.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a little concerned with it expressed because it says that there is hereby established a committee to be known as the Taxi Regulatory Committee, which shall comprise 5 members, of whom one shall be appointed as chairman, appointed by the ministers prescribed by the regulations. I think that can be misconstrued to say that there's only one who will be appointed chairman, should be appointed by the minister. I am proposing that we say there is hereby established a committee to be known as the Taxi Regulatory Committee, which shall comprise 5 members appointed by the minister as prescribed by the regulations, of whom one shall be appointed as chairman. So it is clear that the minister appoints all the members of the committee. Legal, that's okay? Okay. So I don't know if I'm clear.
You're clear. I follow you.
So you should now read this: hereby establish a committee to be known as the Nevis Taxi Regulatory Committee, which shall comprise 5 members appointed by the ministers prescribed by the regulations, of whom one shall be appointed as chairman.
That's straightforward. Question is that clause 13 as amended, and the amendment should be that the 5 will be selected by the minister, of who one will be chairman. Am I correct?
We just rearranged
Yeah,
this
yeah.
section. And on the clock, you got the
I have it.
Okay. clause 13 as amended to form part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 12,
Clause 12, we had a concern about the T-plate not being transferable to another vehicle. We wanted to add without written permission of the Ministry of Tourism. So at section 21 of the ordinance amended, paragraph 3, subparagraph 3, a T-plate assigned to a vehicle shall not be transferable to another vehicle without the written permission of the Ministry of Tourism. We comfortable with that? Without the written permission of the Minister of Tourism? Is that
Means you would have said
so, we leave it as ministry. So a T-plate assigned to vehicle shall not be transferable to another vehicle without the written permission of the Ministry of Tourism.
is it clear there? This is 12. 3. Yeah. Without the written permission of the Ministry of Tourism. Yeah. I have it here. No, I thought you all were discussing something related. Sorry.
Forgive me, we're going backwards, if you don't mind. Just so we get it right, at section 13, where we have section 22, at subsection 4, they're saying that an operator is agreed by decision of the ministry as opposed to the minister. Although technically any decision of the ministry is the minister's decision. But you want to say
An operator who is
agreed by decision of the ministry
Ministry.
has a right to appeal to the committee. So rather than minister, we just want to, for consistency.
Ministry.
Yeah.
So then, the question is that section 13 be amended in section 1 and 3, 1 and 4, sorry. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? Yeah. The ayes have it.
clause 12,
question is that clause 12 be amended in subsection 3, which should read, a plate assigned to a vehicle shall not be transferable to another vehicle without written permission of the Ministry of Tourism. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 10.
Question is that clause 10. Was there a question mark to subsection 5? Question is that subsection 10 do form part of it. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 9.
Question is that clause 9 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 8.
Subsection 8, clause 8 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 7.
The question is that clause 7 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 6.
The question is that clause 6 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 5.
The question is that clause...
We have an amendment. Clause 5, subparagraph 2. Wait,
Clause 4.
No. No, there's no clause.
Clause 4.
4, sorry. So paragraph 2, any operator operating in the prescribed areas as set up in Schedule 1 must hold a certificate of training with a valid taxi permit. A certificate of training with a valid taxi permit issued by the Ministry of Tourism. That's correct? I'm not here. So just use valid taxi permit, that's all. Valid ID. Okay. So I'm being told that what this should be saying is that any operator operating in prescribed areas set in Schedule 1 must hold a valid taxi. Valid ID and taxi permit? Yeah. Issued by the Ministry of Tourism. If you have that, Mr. President. Any operator operating in prescribed areas set on Schedule 1 must hold a valid ID and taxi permit issued by the Ministry of Tourism.
And taxi permit issued by the Ministry of Tourism. Is that what it's supposed to be?
Valid ID and permit issued by the
Ministry of Tourism. Yeah. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Question is that clause 3 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Question is that clause 2 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? Question is,
Clause 1.
question is that clause 1, short title, do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Enacting clause.
The question is that the enacting clause do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Title.
Question is that the title do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The House resume.
Mr. President, I rise to confirm that the bill, shortly entitled the Nevis Tax and Tour Bus Amendment Bill 2019, has gone through committee stage with some amendments, and I now move that we suspend Standing Order 57 to allow this bill to be read for a third time and passed.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
The question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Taxi Tours and Bus Operation Amendment Ordinance Bill number 2019 be read a third time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The bill be read a third time.
Passed.
And passed.
A bill to amend the Nevis Taxi and Tour Bus Ordinance Number 1 of 2012 and for matters related thereto are connected therewith.
The bill has been read a third time and passed.
Mr. President, I rise to move that the bill shortly entitled Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Amendment Number 2 Bill 2019 be read a second time.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion. Sorry, and reserve my right to speak on the bill.
The bill
Mr. President, I rise once again to make my contribution on the bill that is before this Honorable House, the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Amendment Number 2 of 2019. Mr. President, today we seek to amend two sections of the Development Control Ordinance, Mr. President. And the intent, Mr. President, is to simply to codify the function and powers of the Development Advisory Committee by inserting two sections, Mr. President, two new sections, and also to bring some clarity, Mr. President, to the function as to how things interrelate with the Cabinet and the DAC Committee, Mr. President. Mr. President, the amendment that we are seeking today in Section 6 of the ordinance, we are hoping, Mr. President, to insert two new sections, Mr. President, that will outline the functions of the Development Advisory Committee. The aim, Mr. President, is to simplify and to give some clear direction as to the function of the Advisory Committee. 6A, Mr. President, will be a new insert after Section 6. And Section A of that new insert, as it regards to the function of the DAC Committee, reads thus. Section A, Mr. President, to review applications for concept, consideration, and acceptance. Section B, Mr. President, to review application for detailed development permission. And Section C, Mr. President, to carry out site visits if an application with respect to the land or building has been made to the Director of Physical Planning, and in particular, to verify any information represented in an EIA impact assessment submitted with any application, Mr. President. A new section, Section 6B, is to give the outline, Mr. President, of the powers of the Development Advisory Committee. Section A reads thus: to approve on condition, defer or disapprove any application for consideration and acceptance submitted for review, Mr. President. B, to approve on condition, defer or approve any application for detailed development permission submitted for review. Section C, to enter upon any land for the purpose of inspection or survey if an application with respect to the land or building has been made to the Director of Physical Planning. D, to recommend that a particular application or applications of a particular class be referred to Cabinet for its consideration at the concept, consideration, and acceptance stage, Mr. President. And Section E, to perform such other functions as are necessary for the carrying out of the objects of this ordinance. Those two sections, Mr. President, are two new additions as it relates to the functions and the role of the Development Advisory Committee, Mr. President. The second amendment, Mr. President, deals with Section 28 of the ordinance. And the proposal is, Mr. President, to repeal and replace Section 28 in its present form. And we are proposing, Mr. President, three new sections as it relates to Section 28 of the ordinance. Section 1 of Section 28 reads thus: the Director of Physical Planning may, in appropriate circumstances, prior to submission of an application to the Development Advisory Committee, prepare a preliminary technical report for the committee's consideration. The idea here, Mr. President, is to allow the DAC committee to have the necessary facts, Mr. President, as it relates to any application that comes before the director that has been referred to the DAC committee. Section 2, the Development Advisory Committee may, at the concept, consideration, and acceptance stage, recommend that the Director of Physical Planning refer a particular application or all applications of a specific class or in respect of any particular location to Cabinet for its consideration. And such referral shall be accompanied by the preliminary technical report prepared by the Director of Physical Planning pursuant to subsection 1, Mr. President. Mr. President, the aim here is that any referral to Cabinet should be accompanied, Mr. President, by a technical report to Cabinet. That the Cabinet, Mr. President, will have all of the facts as it relates to the particular application. Section 3, Mr. President, the recommendation of Cabinet that any particular application or class of applications should receive conceptual approval shall not restrict the committee's exercise of its function in the final approval process. Now, Mr. President, while Cabinet may give their consent to a particular development taking place or going forward, it does not negate the Development Advisory Committee to ensure, Mr. President, that all of the necessary requirements are in line for the approval process. It does not mean, Mr. President, that if Cabinet gives the approval for someone to build a hotel, that they can start building tomorrow. They must meet all of the necessary requirements as it relates to the planning process. They must provide all of the necessary drawings, studies, details as it regards to the approval process, Mr. President. Mr. President, these are just the two amendments that we are proposing. I do not believe, Mr. President, that they are contentious by any means. And I hope, Mr. President, that these two amendments will not only give some clarity as it regards to the function of the DAC, and as it also give clarity, Mr. President, as to how applications are referred to Cabinet and the process and the procedures, Mr. President. Mr. President, may it please you.
Pleasant good morning, Mr. President. Pleasant good morning to all. With your permission, I rise to lend my support to the mover of the bill to amend the Physical Planning Development Control Ordinance. I do not believe that the amendments being proposed are controversial in any way. They are very tiny amendments, if I could say, but they serve to remove some of the ambiguity that has plagued us over the years. In terms of what the amendments are proposing to do, they deal mostly with the functions of the Development Advisory Committee, or DAC for short, that has become very popular nowadays. What we have found over the past few years, Mr. President, is that the society is becoming rather litigious. And we have seen, that's the correct word? Litigious. We have seen quite a few actions being taken to the courts, Mr. President. And what this little amendment is doing is clarifying the law, clarifying the ways that the duties of the DAC, making them, specifying what the powers are. Little things like putting down in Section 6B, the powers of the committee, A, to approve on condition, defer or disapprove. Putting things like those in the bill, remove all of the ambiguity, so that when they go out to do the job that they're supposed to do, it is clearly specified in law, and it leaves as little room as possible for us to be sued. Because, nowadays, we have, as the Premier said earlier, we have a lot of lawyers, and, they need work to do. And so, over the past few years, we've been in the courts many times. I am not as comfortable in the courts as some people, and I have been called to the court several times. More often than not as a witness. And if I can avoid the courts, I try to avoid the courts. And if the minister now, with responsibility for physical planning, can avoid the courts, I think he's like me. He would want to avoid the courts. And so we have come to bring these amendments so that the laws would be more straightforward and so that there would be less wiggle room for the lawyers to maneuver and less wiggle room for those who would want to sue, for whatever reasons they would want to sue. You know, it makes the job of the people in the Department of Physical Planning and the job of the persons who are on the Development Advisory Committee and the job for the NIA as a whole a lot better. So I just wanted to come and lend my support, knowing firsthand why it was important to come and bring these amendments. Two amendments, two sections really, but very, very important sections. So with these few words, I want to wish the amendment safe passage through this honorable House. May it please you.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague and my predecessor for his support and contribution to the bill that is before this honorable House. Mr. President, like I said, and like my colleague would have also indicated, this is not a contentious bill, Mr. President. And I believe that with those simple but meaningful modifications, we will give some clarity, Mr. President, to the function of the DAC and how they relate, Mr. President, as it regards to referring matters to Cabinet and the function of the Director of Physical Planning. I want to, therefore, Mr. President, wrap up and certainly want to wish this bill safe passage through this honorable House.
Mr. President, I rise to second motion.
Thank you. The bill, the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Amendment Ordinance number 2 of 2019, be read. And a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance, Chapter 6.09, and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
Bill in committee stage.
Clause 3.
The question is that clause 3 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
The question is that clause 2 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against?
The ayes have it.
The ayes have it.
Clause 1.
The question is that clause 1 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Enacting clause.
The question is that the enacting clause do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Title.
Question is that the title do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
House resumed.
House resumed.
Mr. President, I rise to report that this Honorable House, that the bill shortly entitled Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Amendments Number 2, Bill of 2019, have passed through committee stage, and I seek leave, Mr. President, to have Rule 57 of the standing orders be waived so that the bill can be read, move a third time, and pass.
Mr. President, rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill shortly entitled Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Amendment Ordinance Number 2 of 2019 be read a third time and pass. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance, Chapter 6.09, and for matters related thereto or connected therewith.
The bill has been read a third time and passed.
Adjournment.
Mr. President, with your permission, sir, I would want to say condolences to the family of Ms. Cillian Martin Powell, who departed this life last week at the age of 107 years. I am doing so on behalf of the Honorable Eric Evelyn because I'm certain if he was present, he would have done so himself, and as well as the immediate past minister responsible for social development, of which the elderly was a department in that ministry. Cillian Martin Powell lived an exemplary life. I think it was in the 1970s that she became an amputee, and even after losing one leg, she continued to live a very rewarding life. She continued to raise her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as well as imparting words of wisdom to members of the community in which she lived, Zion. And so her passing is not only a loss to her family, but I would dare say to the entire island of Nevis. My brief word to the family will be to cherish the moments that they would have spent with her and the memories that they would have had over the past 107 years of her life. I believe that she has fought a good life. She kept the faith, but now she must rest. And so on behalf of my family, and I would dare say on behalf of the Nevis Island administration, I would like to wish the entire family our condolences, and may her soul rest in eternal peace. May it please you.
On the note of the adjournment, I personally would like to convey sympathy to the Warner family at Newcastle. Elroy Warner, as we know him as, was an individual who, over the years, was very dear to a lot of us. in St. James's and even the island as a whole. His passing has left a void in the operations of how people in St. James's, and to more precise, Newcastle. He was a farmer in his own rights. We traded information and advice, and he was, in my view, someone that you could rely on in terms of assistance. And on that note, I would like to express my condolence to his wife, Avanel, and the rest of his siblings, and hope that his funeral would be on Thursday. And I'm certain that quite a number of persons will go out to pay their last respects. And with those few words, I want to give my piece on that.
Mr. President, I certainly could not have let this moment pass me by. I was contemplating whether I should at this juncture, but since you have opened up the door and you have certainly allowed me a chance to also express my sympathies to Avanel Warner, where we call a coolie in the Newcastle community, on the passing of her husband. I also want to express my dearest sympathies to the entire Newcastle community and the island of Nevis as a whole, because Elroy Bugger Warner was known by the entire island of Nevis, whether in the church community, whether in the farming community, whether just a happy-go-lucky guy who always seemed to be there present in every circumstance, whether in politics, whether in community service, whether it is in farming, as I said before. But let me also say at this point as well that he, up until his passing, was an employee at the Department of Agriculture, employed at the Madden Stock Farm. I can recall back in 2013 when he joined us, it was like bringing in someone with a wealth of knowledge and experience, because he would have been a livestock farmer for pretty much all his life. Mr. President, I'm sure you remember those days of, I believe he was his uncle, Rollback. You remember that name, I'm sure. He was his
grandfather.
Oh, his grandfather, I stand corrected. I was a very little boy when they used to traverse the communities like Brickhill, Butlers, and even to as far as Gingerland, to buy animals to butcher and sell, the meat products. So I say uncle, but I thank you for the correction, because I certainly didn't know the relationship. But Bugger is someone who I would have known ever since I was a little boy. And it was indeed a pleasure to have him as an employee of the Department of Agriculture assigned to the stock farm in Maddens. And those who would have interacted with him there would certainly attest to the fact that he was a diligent, hard-working gentleman. I can recall on Sundays, there were issues at the stock farm there at Maddens. Things were happening that you don't know about, some of us would never know about, but Bugger was always on site, maybe to turn off some water because of a ruptured pipe, or there were animals that were out of the compound for whatever reason. He was there to ensure that they are returned back to the stock farm. So he would have given us just about going on 7 years of service over there at the Madden Stock Farm. He was a perennial fixture during those years at our agriculture open there as well too. And he, even though he was ill this past March, he was also present and also playing his part to ensure that the event was a success. I will say he will be dearly missed. certainly by myself, certainly by first of all, his wife, I'm sure, would miss him tremendously. And, you know, in talking to her, she would have mentioned that Bugger always called her my queen. And that has or had a touch to it that suggests to me there was, you know, a relationship, a bond between the two of them that will certainly be missed over the years. But Avanel, I would say to you to continue to have the strength and the fortitude to go on, because I know losing someone, a family member, that close as well to, I can only imagine how difficult it is. I cannot say, I can imagine, but I want to say it must be difficult and leave it as that, and hope that you'll find the strength to carry on. So, on behalf of myself, the Department of Agriculture, everyone from the Permanent Secretary all the way down to the field staff, we would want to express our sympathies. The funeral, like you mentioned, Mr. President, will be on Thursday morning at 10 a.m. And if I were to encourage all of us to go, I'll say come early, because I believe the whole of Nevis would want to go and pay the last respects to Bugger because of the affection and the affectionate person that he was. And I would want to be there early myself to offer pay my last respect. So with those few words, Mr. President, may his soul continue to rest in peace, and as we say from time to time, rise in glory. Thank you.
This Honorable House adjourns, sign and die.